question I see brought up a lot is, should they remake Sharpe? It's a big question. On one hand, the series is beloved, gritty, and grounded in a real moment of history. One of the few military dramas that made the Napoleonic Wars feel personal. On the other hand, this is 2025, and television has changed a lot. Bigger budgets for shows, updated filming techniques, and worldview changes within the industry. Some might say film and TV has evolved. Others would say companies have turned beloved franchises into political and social propaganda machines. This video isn't about picking a side. I try to keep an open mind on these things. What I'm personally looking at is, well, for starters, what made Sharpe so popular to begin with, and then to see if we could create an acceptable remake in 2025. So let's start by seeing why the original was so great to begin with. The ITV Sharpe series starring Sean Bean, which ran from 1993 to 2008, was rough around the edges, and all the better for it. It wasn't polished prestige TV, and it didn't have HBO money for countless reshoots and re-edits. It was filmed in harsh, often chaotic conditions, from Crimea to Turkey, and then in later episodes in India. And I think, let's be honest, it was held together with a lot of gaffer tape and just sheer willpower. Crew members doubled as extras, cannonballs were launched into cardboard walls, there are continuity errors, clunky edits, and definite costume inconsistencies. But yet, somehow, it just all worked. Sean Bean didn't just play Richard Sharpe, he was Richard Sharpe. A man dragged up from the gutter, constantly reminded of his low birth, forced to fight not just the French, but the snobbery of his own side. He wasn't smooth, he wasn't noble in the traditional sense, he was raw, angry, prone to violence, but also fiercely loyal, brave to the bone, and always, for better or for worse, his own man. He was a British hero who actually felt British. Not an idealised Marvel version, not a self-aware wink at a camera, just a soldier doing what he had to do to survive and lead. But Sharpe was never a one-man show. The world around him mattered. Dara O'Malley's Patrick Harper was more than just comic relief, he was the heart, a brother in arms. Their bond made every episode stronger. You also have Michael Cochrane's pompous, despicable Simerson, Brian Cox giving instant gravitas as a calculating Major Hogan, David Troughton and Hugh Fraser as Wellington, respectively, were both good casting, Assumpta Serna as Teresa Marino, and of course you have Pete Postlethwaite as the absolutely chilling and loathsome Hageswell. There wasn't really many weak links. Even one-scene characters often felt fleshed out and grounded in the world. And what a world it was. Yes, the battles were scrappy, but they felt earned. When a cannon went off or a musket was fired, you felt the smoke and weight of it. The show didn't need 10,000 CGI soldiers, it gave you about 50 blokes on a hill and made you believe that they were fighting for the future of Europe. But it wasn't just the action. Sharpe captured the social layers of the time, class divide between officers and enlisted men, the brutal politics of the army, and the moral compromises that come with war. And it didn't need to spell it out for you. There were no exposition dumps, no clumsy lectures, the storytelling respected you, and it expected you to keep up. And that's rare. And I think that's why Sharpe stuck with people, and why decades later, we're still talking about it. Not because it was flashy, not even because it was perfect, but because it had soul. It was storytelling with blood under its fingernails. It was British television at its most unvarnished. And in many ways, its most honest. Now let's take a look at what the TV landscape has looked like over the past few years, because if Sharpe were remade today, it wouldn't be in a vacuum. And I think there have been some pleasant surprises. You could take Reacher on Amazon for example. It threw out the weird, shrink-wrapped Tom Cruise fantasy version and gave us a protagonist who actually resembles the books. A massive physical presence with dry wit, sharp sense of justice, and a believing world weariness. It respected the material, the tone, the pacing, and it knew what it was adapting and who it was for. You also had The Last Kingdom, which I quite enjoyed, and it was another Bernard Cornwell adaptation. It took liberties, sure, compressing timelines and dramatising events for television, but at its heart, it honoured Cornwell's work. It felt lived in, grounded, brutal, emotional, and narratively consistent. Uhtred's journey felt real because the show trusted the core of the books and the people watching the show. But for every Reacher and The Last Kingdom, we have the shows that are on the other half of the coin. If we start with The Rings of Power, it had a budget the size of a small country. It looked stunning, sweeping shots, lush costumes, visual grandeur, but did it have Tolkien's tone? Well, that was nowhere to be found. Characters felt hollow, dialogue was stiff, the timelines were a mess, and instead of telling a compelling story, it felt like a committee ticking off a checklist. Strong female character? Yep, check. Mysterious dark stranger? Oh yeah, check. It just felt like the magic was gone. The Wheel of Time as well was no better for me, a vast mythic series with incredible source material turned into what felt like a soap opera. Key moments were rushed, arcs were distorted, or discarded entirely. Characters who should have had weight and depth were reduced to tropes. It wasn't just bad storytelling, it was storytelling afraid to trust the source, which is just a common problem at this point. Even The Witcher, which began strong, quickly derailed. Season 1 was tight, character-driven, and anchored in the grim fairy tale tone of the books. But from that point onwards, it just kind of disappeared. The showrunners veered into creating their own version of The Witcher, sidelining Geralt, introducing bizarre pacing choices, and losing sight of what made it special. Henry Cavill himself, arguably the biggest draw and biggest fan of the books, walked away from the role because of creative differences, being replaced by Liam Hemsworth. And I think that kinda does tell you everything. And on that vein, casting is where this whole thing could fall apart. Henry Cavill, I think, was the perfect Geralt. Liam Hemsworth, with all due respect, feels like a Temu Geralt. In The World of Sharpe, Sean Bean wasn't a megastar in 1993. He was a rugged, hungry actor who brought real-world edge to a historical role. I would argue he had to impress even more because Paul McGann was originally cast as Sharpe until he got injured during filming. But the rest, as I say, is history, and Sean Bean is now synonymous with Sharpe. Along that casting route, I think today they'd probably go one of two ways: an unknown with the right look but zero support, or a safe, bankable name who doesn't fit the role at all. And what I fear is that they'd try to make Sharpe more relatable by softening him. Less anger, less violence, more speeches about feelings, they'd reframe his roughness as toxic. The same man who would take no BS from anyone would now have to be redeemed every episode with a moral lecture. And Harper probably turned into just a comic relief character, or worse, just a bland yes man. That deep Irish backbone, the loyalty, the grounded friendship, that's harder to write than just giving him a few one-liners and calling it a day. And that's something that modern day writers just don't seem to get. Then you have the women in Sharpe. Mostly, they are complex written characters with their own strengths and weaknesses. However, I feel they would try to make every female character a soldier of sorts, even have some trying to fight on the front lines, which would remove any historical authenticity to it. The characters of Sharpe are also written and described very specifically. We know what they look like, and we know their characteristics. It is very common in modern day TV to gender and race swap characters. Now, could it work? Sure, absolutely. There are many instances where it has worked, but only if the casting honours the soul of those characters, not just their silhouettes. You could take the upcoming Harry Potter reboot series for example. Papa Asiedu was cast as Snape, and this has already divided opinion, and the show isn't even aired yet. On one side you've got a group of people excited to see a fresh take. On the other, fans who feel this is a classic case of a character change to fit an agenda, or a tick box. Sometimes it's not about talent, it's about fit. I am sure he is a great actor, but is he right for Snape? You can have a great actor who's just wrong for the part, Tom Cruise's Reacher for example. And with a character like Richard Sharpe, casting someone who feels like they were plucked from a modelling agency or trained at a corporate diversity workshop is just not going to fly. This is a man who needs to look like he's taken a musket butt to the face more than once. Cornwell's books are also not politically correct, and that's the point. They're grounded in class resentment, in brutality, and a world where you either kill or die. They are written in an era where HR just didn't exist. Sharpe sleeps with every woman under the sun, he says the wrong things and makes brutal decisions. He's not a modern hero, but he feels real, and I think that's why we root for him. A modern series would have to resist the urge to moralise. The class divide between the officers and ranks needs to stay. The filth and cruelty of war needs to stay. The idea of Sharpe earning his respect, not being gifted it because he says the right slogans, that is essential. Faithfulness doesn't mean copying the books word for word, but it does mean honouring what drives the characters and grounds the story. Now, let's be honest, the original Sharpe looked a bit ropey at times. It was shot in Ukraine, Turkey, Portugal, India, to name a few places, often with 6 extras pretending to be battalions. However, it made up in heart what it lacked in polish. Today, with bigger budgets, you could go full Ridley Scott. You could show the full horror of Baderhof, the chaos of Talavera, and the spectacle of Waterloo. You could recreate entire battlefields with drone shots, digital enhancements, and historically accurate uniforms. This is actually what would excite me. But here's the catch. If you spend all that money on spectacle, and on character, you've got Napoleon all over again. Gorgeous, but hollow. And that's what made Sharpe so special. It was the man, not the musket. The danger we have is studios chasing set pieces instead of soul. So I think to round it off, could you remake Sharpe in 2025? Yes, absolutely. Of course you could. But should you? And I think that depends entirely on who makes it. If it's someone who understands the material, who respects Sharpe as an angry, flawed, brilliant survivor that he is, then I'd love to see it. And I think of all the studios that could make it work, HBO are probably the only one that could. I think Netflix, Amazon and Disney would just bastardize it. But let's be honest, I personally don't trust most modern studios to do it right. The temptation to update Sharpe, to sand off the rough edges, make him better behaved, and add in social commentary that feels stapled on, would be too strong. They'd mistake grittiness for cruelty, masculinity for toxicity, and pride for arrogance. They'd rewrite it for TikTok clips and international streaming metrics, and they'd lose everything that made Sharpe resonate. So yes, remake Sharpe, but only if you dare make him Sharpe, not a cleaned up, boardroom approved version. Otherwise, leave it be. Let him march into history, muddying magnificent. Because essentially, that was soldiering. So what do you think? Should they bring back Sharpe? Or is it best left as a classic that doesn't need modern meddling? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and please do like, share and subscribe for more Sharpe related content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over the hills and far away.